This weekend marks midsummer. Half of the holiday's done and half to come, with the C&E on the horizon. And we get to celebrate, of all things, Civic Holiday tomorrow. This holiday has an identity crisis, different names throughout both provinces and cities. For instance, it's the Terry Fox holiday in Manitoba, BC Day in BC, Heritage Day in Alberta, and Natal Day in Nova Scotia. In Ontario and Burlington, we have Joseph Brant Day, celebrating the Mohawk chief known for his loyalty to the British during the American Revolution and his skills in treaty negotiations. It's McLaughlin Day in Oshawa, celebrating the man who brought General Motors to their city. Ottawa celebrates Colonel By Day, the leader of the construction of Rideau Canal and founder of Bytown, which became Ottawa. While John Galt Day in Guelph celebrates the Scottish novelist and businessman who founded their city. In Toronto, we celebrate SIMCOE Day, named after the first Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada. SIMCOE, a British veteran of the American Revolution, a member of an aristocratic family, is remembered for many things, but none more than for his opposition to slavery. When he was selected in 1791 as the first Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada, he declared that the principles of the British Constitution do not admit of that slavery which Christianity condemns. And he committed himself to doing away with slavery in Upper Canada. He was the leading proponent of the Act Against Slavery, which was enacted in July 1793 in the second session of his newly established Parliament. This was the very first slavery abolishing law ever passed anywhere in the British Empire, more than 40 years before it was abolished across the empire, and 70 years before the Emancipation Proclamation of the USA. The bill, which SIMCOE managed to get passed, was not perfect, but it was a vast improvement over legislation anywhere else in the world. First acts are rarely the last words on a subject, but taking the first step, passing the first legislation, is essential to getting the process on track. SIMCOE Day on the first Monday of August ties in well with Ontario's declaration of the 1st of August as Emancipation Day, because slavery was abolished in the British Empire on that day in 1834. Again, not an official holiday, but very close to SIMCOE on the first Monday of August. With all the varied names given this holiday weekend, not one acknowledges the contribution of any woman. Yet the impressions left by women offer a far different picture of the lives and motivations of early settlers and legislators than do the official government records or the writings of men. This SIMCOE Day, I'd like to remember his wife, Elizabeth Posthuma Gwilym Simcoe, who left over 500 paintings and a diary chronicling her experiences in the closing days of 17th century Canada. I highly recommend reading her diary. To accompany her husband, Elizabeth left behind their 4 eldest daughters, with friends knowing that it would be 5 years before she would see them again. Only their 2 youngest accompanied them on the month-and-a-half ocean crossing, which Elizabeth portrayed as a great adventure. Wind northwest, cold, hard gale. This hard gale did not cool the cabins, which had been so extremely heated. I was therefore glad to be on deck to get rid of my headache, notwithstanding the weather was so rough that I was obliged to hold fast by a cannon. The waves, rising like mountains, have the grandest and most terrific appearance, and when the ship dashes with violence into the sea, much as a chaise in the act of overturning, it is surprising she rights again. I viewed this tempestuous scene with much astonishment. Although an English gentlewoman, her recording of her adventures in Canada portray a person well chosen to be part of this brave new world. While the Simcoes lived in great comfort on their 5,000-acre Wolford estate in England, they left comfort and family behind for a land where most of the citizenry inhabited one-room cabins with no proper roads and where formal education was virtually unknown. In this Canada, she found adventure in discomfort. I desired to drive out last evening, though everybody foretold an approaching thunderstorm, which indeed came on with great violence. I feared that the lightning would make the horse run away, but he only started at every flash. However, we got back safe and in time to save the marquise from being blown over. We were so cold and wet, we were glad to drink tea. It was quite dark and too windy to allow of our burning candles. I wrapped myself up in 2 or 3 greatcoats and intended, if the tent was blown down, to take shelter under the great dinner table. The rain and wind did not cease for 2 hours, and we had no means of drying our clothes and were obliged to sleep in a wet tent. However, we have not caught cold. It is fun hearing her 18th century perspective, so seemingly bizarre when viewed with 21st century eyes. I walked this evening in a wood lately set on fire by some unextinguished fires being left by some persons who had encamped there, which in dry weather often communicates to the trees. Perhaps you have no idea of the pleasure of walking in a burning wood, but I found it so great that I think I shall have some wood set on fire for my evening walks. The smoke arising from it keeps the mosquitoes at a distance, and when the fire has caught the hollow trunk of a lofty tree, the flame issuing from the top has a fine effect. In some trees, where but a small flame appears, it looks like stars as the evening grows dark, and the flare and smoke, interspread in different masses of dark woods, has a very picturesque appearance. Why did Elizabeth leave her children and life behind to accompany her husband and serve on the empire's frontier? I posit that the sense of duty and responsibility was ingrained through the teachings of both church and tutors and predetermined her response to serve where needed. The teachings of Christ, as recorded by Luke, would have been inculcated in every aspect of her upbringing. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded, and from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. After their 5-year term in Canada ended, it did not mean the end of service to the Empire. Indeed, when Colonel SIMCOE died in Exeter in 1806, at the age of 54, they were in the midst of preparations to travel to India to assume his new responsibilities as Commander-in-Chief there. Service owed for blessings given remains unchanged. Unfortunately, too often we attribute our successes to our own efforts rather than the gifts of God. Each of us needs to look at all that we have been given and consider our debt to others. And then we need to proceed to make a down payment on this debt in giving to others. Our time, efforts, smiles, and a listening ear cost nothing, but can make such a difference in another's life. So let's get chipping away at our debt. Much has been given to us. So may it be. Amen. Long summer weekends and holidays are times for families, friends, and strangers. In our indebtedness, let us introduce others to both God and the pleasures of summer.